The blood on Grace Lawson's skirts was still damp when she stumbled into Pinos Altos, New Mexico territory, on a scorching July afternoon in 1878. Her hand pressed protectively over the slight swell of her belly that she prayed nobody would notice beneath her loose traveling dress. She had walked the last 3 miles after her horse went lame, leaving the animal with a kind farmer who promised to tend to it. And now her feet ached inside her worn boots as she surveyed the dusty main street of this mining town nestled in the Mogollon Mountains. The blood wasn't hers, but belonged to Thomas Whitmore, the man who had promised to marry her before putting a bullet in his own head when she told him about the baby. She had tried to save him, pressed her hands against the wound, but he died looking at her with something between regret and relief in his eyes. Grace was 22 years old and had nowhere else to go. Her parents had died of cholera 2 years prior, and Thomas had been the son of her father's business partner in Santa Fe. Everyone expected them to marry. Everyone thought he was honorable and good. Nobody knew about his gambling debts, his drinking, or the way he would rage when things didn't go his way. When she told him she was carrying his child, he had looked at her with such hatred that she took a step back. Then he pulled out his revolver, put it to his temple, and pulled the trigger. She had cleaned herself as best she could at a creek outside town, but traces of brown still stained the green fabric of her dress. She needed work. She needed shelter. She needed to disappear before Thomas's family came looking for answers about why their son was dead, and their future daughter-in-law had vanished. The saloon seemed like the worst option, so Grace walked past it toward what looked like a general store. A sign hanging crooked on the building next door read, "Boarding House Mrs. Chen Clean Rooms Fair Prices." That seemed promising, though she had exactly $12.30 to her name. The store was cooler inside, smelling of tobacco, coffee, and leather. A middle-aged woman with sharp eyes looked up from behind the counter where she was tallying figures in a ledger. "Help you?" the woman asked, her gaze taking in Grace's disheveled appearance, the stains on her dress, the way she swayed slightly on her feet. "I need work," Grace said, lifting her chin despite her exhaustion. "I can read, write, and do figures. I can sew, cook, and clean. I'm a hard worker and I don't complain." The woman studied her for a long moment. Running from something, Grace met her eyes. "Someone died." "It wasn't my fault, but his family won't see it that way. I need a fresh start." The honesty seemed to surprise the woman. She closed her ledger with a snap. "I'm Margaret Porter. I run this store with my husband, though he's down in Silver City on business for the week. We could use help, especially with inventory and the books. Can you really do figures?" "Yes, madam. My father was a merchant. He taught me everything about running a business. The pay is $1 a day, 6 days a week, plus room and board at Mrs. Chen's, which I'll cover for the first month. After that, you pay your own way. You start tomorrow morning at 6. Deal?" Grace felt tears prick her eyes but refused to let them fall. "Deal. Thank you, Mrs. Porter." "Don't thank me yet. You'll earn every penny. Now go get yourself settled at the boarding house and tell Mrs. Chen I sent you. And for heaven's sake, change out of that dress and burn it. You look like you've been to hell and back." Grace managed a weak smile. "Something like that." Mrs. Chen's boarding house was run by a tiny Chinese woman whose husband had died in the mines 5 years prior. She spoke perfect English with a slight accent and didn't ask questions when Grace appeared at her door with Margaret Porter's recommendation. The room was small but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a trunk for belongings. Grace had so few possessions that they barely filled a corner of the trunk. That first night, she lay in bed with her hand on her belly and tried not to think about Thomas's blood on her hands, the sound of the gunshot, or the baby growing inside her. She was nearly 4 months along, and soon her condition would be impossible to hide. What would happen then? No respectable woman had a child out of wedlock. She would lose her job, her room, everything. Maybe she could say she was a widow. Maybe she could invent a dead husband who died honorably in a mining accident or a shootout. But lies had a way of catching up to you, especially in small towns where everyone knew everyone else's business. Sleep came fitfully, full of dreams that twisted into nightmares. She woke before dawn, washed with the cold water in the basin, and dressed carefully in her one clean dress. This one a dark blue calico that was slightly too big, which suited her purposes perfectly. She wrapped a shawl around her shoulders despite the morning warmth and made her way to the general store. Margaret Porter was already there, lighting lamps and preparing to open. She looked Grace up and down with approval. "Better. There's coffee on the stove in the back. Help yourself, then I'll show you how we organize things." The work was exactly what Grace needed, demanding enough to occupy her mind but not so physically strenuous that she worried about the baby. She took inventory, updated the ledgers, waited on customers, and learned the rhythms of the store. Margaret was a fair but exacting employer who expected perfection and didn't tolerate laziness. 3 weeks passed. Grace fell into a routine that felt almost normal. She made small talk with customers, learned the gossip of the town, and carefully cultivated the image of a quiet, respectable young woman who kept to herself. Nobody asked about her past, though she caught speculative looks from some of the miners and cowboys who came through. Then Isaac Edwards rode into town. Grace was restocking shelves when she heard the sound of horses outside and looked up to see a man dismounting from a beautiful roan stallion. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and moved with the easy confidence of someone completely comfortable in his own skin. He wore the typical garb of a working cowboy: denim pants, a worn shirt, a vest, and a hat that had seen better days. A gun belt sat on his hips, but he wore it like a tool rather than a threat. He walked into the store, and Grace found herself staring. He had dark hair that needed a trim, a strong jaw shadowed with stubble, and blue eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. He was probably around 26 or 27, with the weathered look of a man who spent his life outdoors. "Morning," he said, his voice a pleasant baritone. "I need supplies for a 2-week cattle drive. Got a list here." Margaret appeared from the back. "Isaac Edwards, I heard you were moving cattle through this area. How's your father's ranch doing?" "Well enough, Mrs. Porter. Pa sends his regards." He handed over the list, and Margaret scanned it with a practiced eye. "This'll take me about an hour to put together. Grace, can you help Mr. Edwards here with anything else he might need?" Grace nodded, suddenly nervous though she couldn't say why. "Of course." Isaac turned those blue eyes on her, and she felt a flutter in her stomach that had nothing to do with the baby. "I could use some advice on fabric, actually. My youngest sister is turning 16 next month, and Ma asked me to bring back something nice for a new dress. What does she like?" Grace asked, moving toward the bolts of fabric stacked on a table near the window. "Pretty things," Isaac said with a slight smile. "She's always been the girly one, unlike our other sister who'd rather rope cattle than sew." Grace couldn't help but smile back. "Does she have a favorite color?" "Blue, I think, or maybe green. Hell, I don't know, I'm not good at this sort of thing. Let me show you a few options." Grace selected several bolts and spread them out. "This blue would bring out her eyes, this green is practical and won't show dirt, and this." She unfurled a beautiful floral cotton in shades of rose and cream. "This is special, for occasions." Isaac examined them all with surprising seriousness. "She'd love that last one, but Ma would kill me for buying something so impractical. I'll take 4 yards of the blue and 3 of the green." That way she can have one for every day and one for church. Good choice, Grace said, measuring and cutting the fabric with practiced efficiency. As she worked, she was acutely aware of him watching her. I haven't seen you around before, Isaac said. You new to Pino's Altos? I've been here about a month, working for Mrs. Porter. Where are you from originally? Grace hesitated, then opted for partial truth. Santa Fe, but my parents passed and I needed a change. I'm sorry about your parents. His sympathy sounded genuine. That's a hard thing. Thank you, Grace said quietly, wrapping the fabric in brown paper and tying it with string. Margaret called from the back. Isaac, your supplies are ready. As Isaac paid and loaded his purchases, Grace found herself disappointed that their conversation was over. He was easy to talk to, and there was something solid and dependable about him that made her feel safe for the first time in months. He tipped his hat to her on his way out. Pleasure meeting you, Miss Lawson. Grace Lawson. Miss Lawson. His smile was warm. I'm sure I'll see you again. After he left, Margaret gave her a knowing look. Isaac Edwards is one of the good ones. His father owns the Double E Ranch about 15 miles north of here. They run cattle and breed horses. Isaac is the oldest of 4 children and will inherit the whole operation someday. He's honorable, hardworking, and handsome to boot. Half the unmarried women in 3 counties have set their caps at him. Grace busied herself straightening the fabric display. He seems very nice. Nice, Margaret laughed. That's one word for it. Girl, the way he was looking at you, I'd say he thought you were more than nice. Grace felt her cheeks heat. Don't be ridiculous. He was just being friendly. We'll see. But Grace told herself not to think about Isaac Edwards. She was pregnant with another man's child, on the run from his wealthy family, and in no position to catch anyone's interest. She needed to focus on survival, not romance. Yet over the next 2 weeks, she found Isaac appearing in her thoughts at odd moments. The way he had smiled, the kindness in his eyes, the careful way he had chosen fabric for his sister. Then one evening as she was closing up the store, Isaac walked in. We're just closing, Grace said, surprised. I know. I wanted to catch you before you left. He removed his hat, turning it in his hands in a gesture that seemed nervous. Miss Lawson, I was wondering if you might let me walk you back to your boarding house. Grace glanced out the window. The sun was setting, painting the mountains in shades of gold and purple. It's only 2 buildings down. I know, Isaac said again, but I'd like the company if you'll have me. Margaret appeared from the back room, pulling on her shawl. Oh, Isaac, how nice of you to escort Grace home. I was just leaving myself. You 2 go on ahead. She bustled out before Grace could object, leaving them alone in the dim store. You don't have to, Grace said. Really, it's not necessary. Maybe not necessary, Isaac agreed, but I'd like to, unless I'm overstepping. If I am, just say so and I'll apologize and never bother you again. There was such earnest hopefulness in his expression that Grace found herself nodding. All right, thank you. They stepped out into the cooling evening air. Pino's Altos was quieter at this hour, most of the miners already in the saloon or at home with their families. The walk to Mrs. Chen's took less than 2 minutes, but Isaac made the most of it. I finished the cattle drive yesterday, he said. Got a good price in Silver City. Now I'm back to help with the horses. We've got some fine new foals this year. You breed horses? Grace asked, genuinely interested. Among other things. Cattle pays the bills, but horses are my passion. There's something about working with them, earning their trust, seeing them grow into their potential. He paused. Sorry, I tend to go on about horses. Drives my sisters crazy. No, it's interesting. I've always loved horses, though I never learned to ride properly. My parents thought it wasn't ladylike. That's a shame. Riding is one of life's great pleasures. They had reached the boarding house steps. Isaac looked down at her, and in the fading light his eyes were very blue. "Miss Lawson, I'd like to call on you properly. With your permission." Grace's heart sank even as it lifted. She wanted to say yes. She wanted so badly to say yes. But she was pregnant with another man's child, and it was only a matter of time before it showed. "Mr. Edwards, I'm very flattered, but I'm not in a position to be courted right now." "Is there someone else?" "No, but my circumstances are complicated." "Complicated how?" Grace looked away. "I can't explain. Please just take my word that it wouldn't be fair to you." Isaac was quiet for a moment. "All right, I'll respect that. But Grace, if you change your mind or if those complications change, I'd still like to know you better. As friends, if nothing else." Friends? She could do friends, couldn't she? At least for a little while. "Friends would be nice," she said softly. His smile was worth the risk. "Friends it is. Good night, Grace." "Good night, Isaac." Over the next month, Isaac became a regular presence in her life. He would stop by the store several times a week, always with some excuse. He needed supplies, he wanted advice on a gift, he heard they had a new shipment of something. They would talk while she worked, their conversations ranging from the mundane to the surprisingly deep. He told her about growing up on the ranch, about his dreams of breeding the finest horses in the territory. She told him carefully edited stories of her childhood, her parents, her love of books and learning. He never pushed for more than friendship, though Grace sometimes caught him looking at her with an expression that made her breath catch. The problem was that she was falling for him. Completely and hopelessly falling for a man who didn't know she was carrying another man's baby. Every day she woke up and looked at herself in the small mirror above the washstand, checking the growth of her belly. At 5 months, she could still hide it with loose dresses and careful positioning. At 6 months, that would become harder. She needed to tell him. She needed to end this friendship before he got hurt. But every time she resolved to do it, he would smile at her or say something that made her laugh, and she would lose her courage. Then one Saturday in late September, Isaac invited her on a picnic. "Just as friends," he assured her when he saw her hesitation. "I thought you might like to see the countryside. We could ride out to Whitewater Creek. It's beautiful this time of year." Grace knew she should refuse. But the thought of spending a whole day with Isaac, away from the watchful eyes of the town, was too tempting. "I don't have a horse," she said weakly. "I'll bring one of ours. A gentle mare who loves everyone. You'll be perfectly safe." "All right," Grace heard herself say. "When?" "Tomorrow after church," she nodded, already mentally going through her wardrobe to figure out which dress would hide her growing belly best while still being suitable for riding. The next day dawned clear and beautiful, the September heat tempered by a cool breeze from the mountains. Grace wore her loosest dress, a brown cotton with a full skirt and a fitted bodice that she had strategically altered to allow for her expanding waistline. Over it, she wore a long jacket that concealed her shape. She felt self-conscious and awkward, but when Isaac saw her, his face lit up with such genuine pleasure that her doubts quieted. "You look lovely," he said, helping her mount the gentle bay mare he had brought. "This is Daisy. She's about the sweetest horse you'll ever meet." Grace settled into the saddle, adjusting her skirts. It had been years since she had ridden, but the feel of the horse beneath her was immediately comforting. Isaac mounted his roan and led the way out of town, heading into the pine-covered hills. They rode in companionable silence for a while, letting the horses pick their way along a well-worn trail. The air smelled of pine and sage, and somewhere nearby a creek burbled over rocks. Grace felt some of the tension that had become her constant companion begin to ease. Whitewater Creek was indeed beautiful, a ribbon of clear water running through a small meadow surrounded by pines. Isaac had brought a blanket and a basket packed with bread, cheese, cold chicken, apples, and a jar of lemonade. They sat in the shade of a large pine and ate, talking about everything and nothing. "Can I ask you something?" Isaac said after a while, his tone careful. Grace tensed. "All right. That first day I met you, you had blood on your dress. Margaret said you cleaned up as best you could before coming to town, but I saw it. And I've seen the way you sometimes look over your shoulder, like you are expecting someone to appear." He held up a hand when she opened her mouth. "I'm not asking you to tell me everything. I just want you to know that whatever happened, whatever you are running from, it doesn't change how I see you." Grace felt tears well up. "How do you see me?" "As someone brave, someone kind and smart and beautiful. Someone I care about more than I probably should, given that we are supposed to be just friends. Isaac, there are things about me you don't know, things that would change how you feel. Are you a murderer?" "What? No, a thief. Of course not." "Then whatever it is, I doubt it would change my feelings." "Grace, I've been trying to respect your wishes, trying to be patient, but I need you to know that I'm falling in love with you. I think I started falling for you the moment you helped me pick out fabric for my sister with such care and attention, like it really mattered to you that a girl you'd never met would have a pretty dress. That kind of kindness, that's who you are." Grace was crying now, tears streaming down her face. "You can't love me, you don't know what I'm carrying." "Then tell me," Isaac said gently, moving closer. "Whatever it is, tell me." This was it, the moment she had been dreading. Grace took a shaky breath and placed her hand on her belly, which was beginning to round obviously now that she wasn't standing. "I'm pregnant," she said. "Nearly 6 months along. The baby's father is dead. He killed himself when I told him about the child. I'm not a widow, Isaac. I was never married. I'm ruined by any standard that matters, and I've been hiding it because I knew that once people found out, I'd lose everything. My job, my room, my reputation. Everything." She waited for him to recoil, to stand up and walk away, to look at her with disgust or disappointment. Instead, Isaac reached out and gently wiped the tears from her cheeks. "Is that what you've been so worried about? Thinking I'd reject you because of this, of course. How could you not? I'm carrying another man's child. I'm not respectable. I'm human," Isaac interrupted. "You're human, Grace. You made choices that didn't work out the way you hoped. That happens. It doesn't make you bad or unworthy. The baby's father didn't think so. He looked at me with such hatred before he—" She couldn't finish the sentence. "Then he was a fool and a coward," Isaac said fiercely. "Any man who would respond to that news with violence doesn't deserve you or a child. Grace, look at me." She raised her eyes to his, expecting to see pity. Instead, she saw determination and something that looked like love. "I meant what I said. I'm falling in love with you, all of you. That includes this baby you're carrying. If you'll have me, I want to marry you, not despite this, but with full knowledge and acceptance of it. You can't be serious." "I'm completely serious. I'm asking you to marry me, Grace Lawson. To be my wife, to live with me on the ranch, to build a life together. We'll raise this child as ours, and if God wills it, we'll have more children together. I'll stand beside you and defend you against anyone who dares to judge you. I'll be a father to this baby and a husband to you if you'll let me." Grace couldn't breathe. This couldn't be real. Men didn't propose to pregnant women carrying other men's children. They just didn't. "Why?" she whispered. "Why would you do this?" "Because I love you," Isaac said simply. "And because I believe in second chances. My own father was adopted after his parents died in a wagon train massacre. My grandfather took him in and raised him as his own, gave him a name and a future. I was raised to believe that family is what you make it, not just blood. This baby deserves a father who wants him or her. You deserve a husband who loves you, and I would be honored to be both." "I don't love you," Grace said, and immediately regretted the words when she saw the flash of pain in his eyes. "That's not true. I think I do love you, but I don't know if it's the kind of love you deserve. I don't know if I can give you what you need when I'm so broken inside." "Then we'll heal together," Isaac said. "Grace, I'm not asking you to be perfect. I'm asking you to try, to give us a chance. To believe that maybe, just maybe, God brought you to Pino's Altos for a reason." Grace looked at this man who was offering her everything she thought she had lost. A home, a family, respect, safety, love. It seemed too good to be true. But as she looked into his eyes and saw nothing but sincerity and affection, she felt something shift inside her. Maybe she could believe in second chances. Maybe she could be brave enough to say yes. "All right," she whispered. "Yes, I'll marry you." Isaac's face broke into a huge smile. He took her hands in his and raised them to his lips, kissing her knuckles gently. "You've made me the happiest man alive. We'll do this right, Grace. We'll get married as soon as possible, before anyone in town starts talking. I'll tell my family you're a widow carrying your late husband's child. That way, no one will question anything. You'd lie for me. I do a lot more than lie for you. Besides, in the eyes of the church, a betrothal was as good as a marriage in earlier times. You were promised to this man, carries his child, and then he died. It's not that far from the truth, and it protects you and the baby. That's what matters." They talked through the afternoon, making plans. Isaac wanted to marry quickly and quietly, then take her home to the ranch. He would introduce her to his family with the widow's story, giving her a fresh start with no shame attached. They would build a life together, and he would love her child as his own. As the sun began to set, they packed up the picnic and rode back to town. Before they parted, Isaac pulled her close and kissed her forehead. "No more secrets," he said. "No more hiding. You're mine now, and I protect what's mine." "I'm not yours yet," Grace reminded him with a small smile. "We're not married. A technicality I plan to fix very soon." "How does Wednesday sound?" "Wednesday. That's only 3 days away." "Exactly. 3 days too long, but I suppose we need at least that much time to make arrangements. I'll talk to the minister tomorrow. You talk to Margaret and Mrs. Chen. We'll keep it small, just a few witnesses, and then I'll take you home." Home. The word sounded like a promise. They were married on Wednesday morning in a simple ceremony at the small church on the edge of town. Grace wore a new dress she had sewn herself in record time, a simple blue cotton with a high waist that disguised her belly. Margaret and her husband stood as witnesses, along with Mrs. Chen and the local blacksmith. The minister was a kind, older man who asked no awkward questions and seemed pleased to unite the young couple. When Isaac slipped a simple gold band on her finger and promised to love and cherish her all the days of his life, Grace felt tears slip down her cheeks. She had thought marriage was lost to her forever. Now here she stood, becoming Mrs. Isaac Edwards, wife of a good man who knew her secrets and wanted her anyway. Isaac kissed her sweetly when the minister pronounced them husband and wife, his lips gentle and careful, as though she might break. It was Grace's first real kiss, and it filled her with warmth and hope. After the ceremony, they had a small gathering at Margaret's store where she had prepared a modest meal. Grace fielded curious questions from the handful of people present, sticking to the story that she was a widow from Santa Fe whose husband had died in a mining accident. The lie tasted bitter, but Isaac's steady presence at her side made it bearable. By early afternoon, they were on the road to the Double E Ranch. Isaac drove a wagon loaded with Grace's few possessions and supplies for the ranch. She sat beside him on the bench, her hands folded in her lap, nervous about meeting his family. "They're going to love you," Isaac assured her, as though reading her mind. "Ma's been after me to settle down for years. She'll be thrilled. My sisters will probably pester you with 1,000 questions. Pa is quiet, but he's fair. And my brother Jake is 17 and mostly thinks about horses and girls. You really think they'll accept me? I know they will. And Grace, remember, to them you're a widow carrying your late husband's child. They'll feel sympathy, not judgment. You have nothing to fear. The ranch appeared as they crested a hill, sprawling across a valley with mountains rising on 3 sides. The main house was built of logs and adobe, large and welcoming with a wide porch wrapped around 3 sides. Several outbuildings dotted the property. A barn, stables, a bunkhouse, storage sheds. Grace could see cattle grazing in distant pastures and horses in a nearby corral. It was beautiful, and it was now her home. The family came spilling out of the house as the wagon pulled up. Isaac's mother was a handsome woman in her 50s with graying blonde hair and warm brown eyes. His father was tall and lean with a weathered face and kind smile. The 2 sisters were both pretty girls in their teens, one dark-haired and one fair. The brother was a gangly youth with Isaac's blue eyes and a shy smile. "You got married," Isaac's mother exclaimed, her hands flying to her mouth. "Isaac Edwards, you went to town for supplies and came home with a wife." "I did, Ma. Everyone, this is Grace. Grace Lawson Edwards now, my wife." The pride in his voice made Grace's heart flutter. "Grace, this is my mother Ann, my father John, my sisters Elizabeth and Catherine, and my brother Jake." Ann Edwards stepped forward and pulled Grace into a warm hug before she could even dismount from the wagon. "Welcome to the family, dear. I can't believe Isaac kept you a secret. When did this courtship happen?" "Recently, Ma," Isaac said, helping Grace down from the wagon. "Grace is, well, she's a widow from Santa Fe. Her husband died in a mining accident a few months back. She's carrying his child and she needed someone to take care of her. I fell in love with her and asked her to marry me. I know it was quick, but when you know, you know." Anne's expression shifted from surprise to sympathy. "Oh, you poor dear. How far along are you?" "6 months, madam," Grace said quietly. "And you've been working at the general store in town. That must have been so hard. Well, your family now. Come inside, let's get you settled. Isaac, you and Jake bring in her things. Girls, help me prepare some food. Our new sister must be exhausted." The warmth of the welcome overwhelmed Grace. Within minutes, she found herself swept into the house, seated at a large kitchen table with a cup of tea in her hands while Anne bustled around preparing food. The sisters peppered her with questions about the wedding, her dress, whether she loved their brother. John Edwards offered his quiet congratulations and welcome. Jake mumbled something polite and then disappeared toward the barn. Isaac caught her eye from across the room and winked, and Grace felt herself relax slightly. Maybe this would be all right. Maybe she really could have a second chance. That evening, after a hearty dinner with the family, Isaac showed Grace to their room. It was spacious and comfortable, with a large bed, a wardrobe, a washstand, and windows that looked out over the mountains. Grace stood in the middle of the room, suddenly nervous now that they were alone. "I can sleep elsewhere if you'd prefer," Isaac said quietly, reading her hesitation. "This is all new and I don't want to rush you into anything you're not ready for." Grace shook her head. "You're my husband, we should share a bed. I'm not sure what to do. My experience with such things it wasn't good." Isaac crossed the room and took her hands. "Then we'll take it slow. We have all the time in the world, Grace. There's no rush. Tonight, let's just sleep beside each other. Get used to sharing space. Everything else can wait until you're ready." His patience and understanding made her love him more. They prepared for bed in the modest fashion of newlyweds still learning each other. Isaac gave her privacy to change into her nightgown, and when they finally lay down side by side in the darkness, he simply took her hand and held it. "Thank you," Grace whispered. "For all of this. For being so kind." "You don't have to thank me for treating you with respect," Isaac said. "That's just basic human decency, but you're welcome. Sleep now. Tomorrow I'll show you around the ranch properly." Grace drifted off to sleep holding her husband's hand, feeling safer than she had in months. The next few weeks passed in a blur of adjustment. Grace learned the rhythms of ranch life, the early mornings and long days, the constant work that went into running a successful operation. Anne taught her how to manage the household, how to preserve food for winter, how to handle the endless cooking and cleaning required to feed a family of ranch hands. The sisters became her friends, especially Elizabeth, who was fascinated by the coming baby. Isaac was patient and attentive, courting her slowly despite already being married. He would bring her wildflowers from his rides. He taught her to ride better, taking her on gentle excursions around the ranch. He talked to her baby belly at night, telling the child stories and promising to teach him or her to ride and rope and love the land. Those moments made Grace cry with gratitude. Slowly, carefully, she let herself believe this was real. Let herself fall deeper in love with the man who had saved her from shame and given her a future. Their physical relationship progressed naturally, gently, until the night Grace finally felt brave enough to truly be his wife in every way. Isaac made love to her with such tenderness and patience that it erased the bad memories, replacing them with new ones full of pleasure and connection. "I love you," she told him afterward, the words coming easier now. "I really do love you, Isaac. I love you too, Grace, more than I can say." At 7 months pregnant, Grace's belly was undeniably large. But as Isaac's wife, surrounded by a supportive family, she no longer felt the need to hide. She wore loose dresses for comfort, not concealment. She let Anne and the girls fuss over her, preparing baby clothes and setting up a cradle in the bedroom. She felt the baby kick and move and shared those moments with Isaac, watching his face light up with wonder. One afternoon in late November, Grace was helping Anne in the kitchen when a sharp pain lanced through her belly. She gasped and grabbed the edge of the table. "Grace, what's wrong?" Anne was at her side immediately. "I don't know. A pain. It's probably nothing." But even as she spoke, another contraction gripped her, stronger this time. "How far apart are the pains? This is only the second one." Grace felt fear rise in her chest. "It's too early. I'm only 7 months. The baby can't come yet." Anne's expression was calm but serious. "Babies come when they're ready, not when we want them to. Elizabeth, ride to town and fetch the midwife. Catherine, help me get Grace to bed. Isaac," she raised her voice, "your wife needs you." The next hours were a blur of pain and fear. The midwife arrived and examined Grace, confirming that the baby was indeed coming early. Isaac held Grace's hand through the contractions, his face pale but determined. Anne directed everything with the efficiency of someone who had done this before. Labor was shorter than expected for a first baby, but more intense. Grace cried and screamed and begged for it to stop, but Isaac never left her side. He whispered encouragement, wiped her face with cool cloths, and told her over and over that she was strong, she could do this. He was right there with her, finally. As the sun was setting outside the bedroom window, Grace gave one last tremendous push and felt the baby slide from her body. The midwife caught the tiny, squalling infant and quickly checked it over. "It's a boy," she announced, her smile broad. "Small but breathing well and crying strong. He's a fighter." Grace burst into tears of relief as the midwife cleaned the baby and wrapped him in a soft blanket. Then she placed the infant in Grace's arms, and Grace looked down at her son for the first time. He was perfect. Tiny and red-faced, with a shock of dark hair and eyes squeezed shut against the brightness. Grace's heart cracked open with a love so fierce it hurt. "Hello, little one," she whispered. "I'm your mama. And this," she looked up at Isaac, who was gazing at the baby with wonder, "this is your papa." Isaac's eyes were wet with tears. "Can I hold him?" Grace carefully transferred the baby to Isaac's arms. He cradled the infant with surprising confidence, supporting the small head with one large hand. "Hey there, son," Isaac murmured. "Welcome to the family. You sure know how to make an entrance." He looked at Grace, his face full of love. "He's beautiful, Grace. You did so well. I'm so proud of you." "We need a name," Grace said. They had discussed names over the past weeks, but never settled on anything definite. Now, looking at her son in Isaac's arms, Grace knew exactly what she wanted. "Thomas," she said. "His father's name was Thomas. He may have been a coward and a fool, but he gave me this child. I'd like to honor that and then move forward. Thomas Edwards." Isaac nodded slowly. "Thomas Edwards. I like it. He'll grow up knowing his birth father's name, but he'll carry mine and be raised as mine in every way that matters." The midwife shooed everyone out so Grace could rest, but Isaac refused to leave. He sat in a chair beside the bed, holding little Thomas and talking to him in a low voice while Grace drifted in and out of sleep. When she woke fully some hours later, it was dark outside and Isaac was still there, the baby sleeping against his chest. "You should sleep too," Grace said softly. "I will. I just wanted to hold him a little longer." Isaac looked up at her, and in the lamplight his expression was tender. "Thank you for letting me be his father. I know I didn't earn it biologically, but I promise I'll earn it every day through my actions. He'll never know anything but love and acceptance in this house. I know. That's why I married you." Isaac carefully placed Thomas in the cradle they had set up beside the bed, then climbed in beside Grace, gathering her gently into his arms. "Get some rest, Mrs. Edwards. Tomorrow we introduce Thomas to the rest of the family officially." The next morning, the Edwards household was transformed by the presence of the baby. Everyone wanted to hold Thomas, to exclaim over his tiny fingers and toes, to welcome him. Anne was particularly smitten with her first grandchild, and the girls fought over who got to help with him. John Edwards pulled Isaac aside, and Grace heard parts of their conversation from where she rested in bed. "You did a good thing, taking on another man's child," John said. "Takes a special kind of man to do that." "It doesn't feel like taking on a burden," Isaac replied. "It feels like gaining a son. I love that boy already, Pa, and I love his mother. This is my family now. Your grandfather would be proud. He took me in when I had nothing, made me his son in every way that counted. You're continuing that legacy. That matters." Grace blinked back tears, overwhelmed by the goodness of these people who had accepted her so completely. Thomas was a relatively easy baby, though small. He ate well and grew steadily, hitting all the milestones the midwife said to watch for. Grace recovered from the birth more quickly than expected, and soon she was back to helping run the household, with Thomas in a sling against her chest or napping in a basket nearby. Isaac was a devoted father from the start. He would walk Thomas around the ranch, showing him the horses and cattle, talking to him about everything even though the baby couldn't understand. He changed diapers without complaint, walked the floor when Thomas fussed at night, and treated the child with the same love and care as if he were truly his son by blood. As winter settled over New Mexico territory, the Edwards Ranch became a warm haven against the cold. Grace had never felt so content. She had a husband who loved her, a beautiful son, a family who had welcomed her without judgment, and a home that felt safe and permanent. One snowy evening in December, as they were settling into bed with Thomas asleep in his cradle nearby, Isaac pulled Grace close and kissed her deeply. "I have something to tell you," he said, his eyes dancing with excitement. "What?" I've been doing some thinking about expanding our horse breeding operation. There's a market for quality horses, especially if we focus on breeding for stamina and intelligence. I think we could make the Double E one of the premier horse ranches in the territory. That sounds wonderful, Grace said, though she wasn't sure why this required such a serious tone. The thing is, it would mean more work, more responsibility, and I'd need a partner, someone who understands business and figures and planning. Someone smart who could help me manage the breeding records and finances. He paused. Would you be interested in being that partner? I know you have your hands full with Thomas, but I thought maybe as he gets older, you might want something more to do than just housework. Grace's heart swelled. He was offering her a role beyond wife and mother, recognizing her skills and intelligence. I'd love that. Thank you for thinking of me. Always, Isaac said. You're my partner in everything, Grace. I want us to build this life together, really together. Spring came, and with it new life on the ranch. Foals were born, calves dropped, and the land turned green and beautiful. Thomas was thriving, growing from a tiny infant into a chubby baby who smiled and cooed and clearly recognized his parents' faces. Grace threw herself into learning everything she could about horse breeding, reading books Isaac borrowed from a rancher friend, and taking detailed notes on bloodlines and characteristics. One warm afternoon in May, Grace was sitting on the porch with Thomas on a blanket beside her when she heard the sound of horses approaching fast. She looked up to see two men riding hard toward the ranch house. Something about them made her stomach clench with fear. Isaac emerged from the barn, his hand instinctively going to the gun on his hip. John appeared from the other direction, also alert. The men reined in their horses at the porch, and Grace recognized one of them as the sheriff from Pino's Altos. Isaac, Mrs. Edwards, the sheriff said, tipping his hat. Sorry to intrude, but we have a situation. These folks have been asking questions in town about a young woman matching your wife's description. He nodded toward the second man, older and well-dressed with cold eyes. My name is Charles Whitmore, the man said, his voice clipped and authoritative. I'm looking for a woman named Grace Lawson. I was told she works in town, but when I arrived, I learned she married you last fall. His gaze fixed on Grace. Hello, Miss Lawson. Grace felt the blood drain from her face. She stood slowly, positioning herself between the men and Thomas. My name is Grace Edwards now. Where is my grandson? Charles demanded. Where is the child you were carrying when you ran from Santa Fe? This is your grandson, Grace said, gesturing to Thomas. This is Thomas, and he's safe and loved. That baby is a Whitmore, not an Edwards. His father may have made mistakes, but that child belongs with family, with his blood family. Isaac stepped forward, placing himself protectively between Charles and his family. That child belongs with his mother and with me, his legal father. I married Grace while she was pregnant. Thomas Edwards is my son in the eyes of the law. You married a woman pregnant with another man's child. Charles looked disgusted. What kind of fool does that? The kind who loves his wife and accepts all of her, including her past, Isaac said evenly. Grace told me everything about your son, Mr. Whitmore, how he killed himself when she told him about the baby. That must have been devastating for you, and I'm sorry for your loss, but that doesn't give you any claim on Thomas. My son is dead because of her. Charles pointed at Grace with shaking finger. She drove him to suicide with her demands and her condition. She's responsible for his death. That's not true, Grace said, finding her voice despite her fear. Your son had demons I couldn't help. His gambling debts, his drinking, his violence. When I told him about the baby, he couldn't face the responsibility, so he chose to end his life rather than deal with the consequences of his actions. I tried to save him, Mr. Whitmore. I held pressure on the wound. I begged him to hold on, but he died anyway. I didn't want that. I never wanted that. Lies. My son was a good man. You corrupted him, and now you're trying to steal his child. The sheriff cleared his throat. Mr. Whitmore, I understand you are grieving, but from a legal standpoint, you don't have a case. Mrs. Edwards is the child's mother and has full legal rights to him. Mr. Edwards married her and claimed the child as his own. Without proof of unfitness or danger, you cannot remove a baby from his mother. I can prove she's a liar and a manipulator, Charles insisted. She left the scene of my son's death, fled Santa Fe without reporting it properly, and has been living under false pretenses. I left because I was terrified, Grace said. Your son had just blown his brains out in front of me. I was covered in his blood, carrying his child, and I knew your family would blame me. I was right to be afraid, wasn't I? You tracked me down, crossed half the territory to do exactly what? Take my baby. Punish me for surviving when your son didn't. You don't deserve to raise a Whitmore. Good thing he's an Edwards then, Isaac said coldly. Sheriff, does this man have any legal standing to be here making threats to my family? The sheriff shook his head. Not that I can see. Mr. Whitmore, I suggest you head back to Santa Fe. If you wish to pursue legal action, you'll need to go through proper channels, but I'm telling you now it won't go anywhere. The mother has rights, and her husband has rights. You, as a grandfather, have no legal claim unless you can prove unfitness, and from what I've seen, this baby is well cared for by good people. Charles's face flushed with anger. This isn't over. That baby carries my family's blood, and he carries mine, Grace said firmly. But more than that, he's being raised by a man who wants him, who loves him, who chose to be his father. Your son had that same chance and refused it. Isaac stepped up when Thomas refused. That makes Isaac the better man and the better father. How dare you? Enough. John Edwards spoke for the first time, his voice quiet but carrying authority. You're upsetting my daughter-in-law and disturbing my household. You've been told you have no legal standing. I'm asking you now, respectfully, to leave our property. If you refuse, we'll be forced to remove you. Several ranch hands had appeared during the confrontation, drawn by the commotion. They stood a short distance away, ready to back up the family if needed. Charles looked at them, looked at the sheriff, who clearly wasn't on his side, and then looked back at Thomas, who had started to fuss at all the raised voices. You haven't heard the last of this, he said finally, turning his horse. I'll find a way to get justice for my son. Your son got exactly what he chose, Grace called after him. Maybe instead of chasing us, you should ask yourself why he thought death was better than being a father. Charles rode away without responding, leaving dust and tension in his wake. The sheriff stayed behind for a few minutes, apologizing for the intrusion and assuring them that he didn't believe Charles had any legal recourse. After everyone left, Grace collapsed onto the porch steps, shaking. Isaac sat beside her and pulled her into his arms while Anne scooped up Thomas, murmuring soothing words to the crying baby. He found us, Grace whispered. I thought we were safe, but he found us. And he can't hurt you, Isaac said firmly. You heard the sheriff. Legally, he has no standing. Thomas is ours, Grace. No one can take him from us. But what if he tries? What if he finds some legal loophole or convinces a judge that I'm unfit? What if— Stop. Isaac turned her face toward him. I know you're scared, but you're not alone anymore. You have me. You have my family. You have this whole ranch behind you. Charles Whitmore is a sad, angry man who lost his son and is looking for someone to blame. That's all this is. He'll rage and threaten, but in the end, he'll have to accept that Thomas is beyond his reach. I married you, not your past, Isaac continued, his voice soft but intense. Whatever happened before, whoever came before, that's done. You're my wife now. Thomas is my son now. This is our family, and I protect my family. Do you understand?" Grace nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I understand. Thank you. Thank you for standing up for us." "Always," Isaac promised, kissing her forehead. "Always and forever." The encounter with Charles Whitmore shook Grace, but as weeks passed with no further contact, she began to relax again. Isaac hired a lawyer in Silver City to document everything legally, ensuring their marriage certificate, and Thomas's birth record showed Isaac as the father. The lawyer assured them that grandfathers had virtually no rights over children with living mothers and legal fathers. Summer arrived with blazing heat and long days of work. Grace threw herself into the horse breeding program, discovering she had a talent for seeing bloodlines and predicting which matches would produce the best offspring. She and Isaac worked side by side, he with the physical training and care of the animals, she with the records and breeding decisions. It was a true partnership, and their business began to thrive. Thomas grew into a happy, active toddler who followed his father everywhere, toddling after Isaac on chubby legs and calling Papa with absolute adoration. Isaac was patient and loving, teaching Thomas about animals and the land, spending hours playing with him and telling him stories. If anyone in the family remembered that Isaac wasn't Thomas's biological father, they never mentioned it. He was Papa, and that was that. One evening in August, as they lay in bed after putting Thomas down for the night, Isaac rolled toward Grace with a serious expression. "I want to talk about something," he said. "That sounds ominous." "Not ominous, just important. Grace, we've been married almost a year now, and I've been thinking about the future. Thomas is wonderful, but I'd like more children, children that we make together if you're willing. I want to give Thomas siblings to grow our family. How do you feel about that?" Grace smiled, her hand drifting to her stomach in a gesture that had become familiar. "I think that's a wonderful idea. In fact, I think we might already be working on it. I'm late, Isaac. About 6 weeks late." Isaac's eyes widened. "You're pregnant? Really?" "I think so. I haven't confirmed it yet, but all the signs are there." He laughed and pulled her into a tight embrace. "That's wonderful. Thomas will be a big brother. We'll have a baby next spring. Grace, this is perfect. You're not worried?" "I mean, we'll have 2 babies under 2 years old. That's a lot of work." "We'll manage. We have help, we have family, and we have each other. This is everything I wanted, Grace. A family with you." Grace confirmed the pregnancy a few weeks later, and the family celebrated with a special dinner. Thomas was too young to understand he would be a big brother, but he seemed to sense something special was happening and was extra cuddly that evening. The pregnancy progressed smoothly, unlike Grace's first. She felt good, worked alongside Isaac on the breeding program, and enjoyed watching Thomas grow and develop. Anne was thrilled about another grandchild and began preparing a whole new set of baby clothes. One afternoon, in late October, a letter arrived from Santa Fe. Grace's hands shook as she opened it, fearing more threats from Charles Whitmore. Instead, it was from a lawyer representing the Whitmore estate. "Dear Mrs. Edwards," the letter began, "I regret to inform you that Mr. Charles Whitmore passed away last month from a heart condition. Before his death, he expressed regret for his actions toward you and wished to make amends. He has left a sum of $5,000 in trust for his grandson, Thomas Edwards, to be accessed when the boy turns 18. Mr. Whitmore also left a letter for you, which I have enclosed. My condolences on this difficult time and best wishes for your family's future." Grace opened the second letter with trembling fingers. "Miss Lawson," it read in shaky handwriting, "by the time you read this, I will be gone. The doctors tell me my heart is failing. which is fitting given that it broke when my son died. I came to Pinos Altos angry and looking for revenge, but seeing you with your family made me realize some truths I didn't want to face. My son was not the man I thought he was. His gambling, his drinking, the darkness he hid from me but that his friends finally revealed after his death, these were problems I chose not to see. You are not responsible for his death. He was. I'm sorry I tried to blame you. I'm sorry I tried to take your child. You were right about one thing. The man who stepped up to be Thomas's father is the better man. I hope my grandson grows up happy and loved, even if he never knows my name. The money is for him, not as a claim or a right, but as an apology and a final attempt to do something good with the Whitmore name. Forgive me if you can. Charles Whitmore. Grace read the letter twice, then handed it to Isaac, who had appeared beside her. He's dead, she said quietly. And he apologized. Isaac read the letter, his expression thoughtful. It takes courage to admit you were wrong, especially when you're dying. I'm glad he found some peace at the end. Should we tell Thomas someday about his birth father, about Charles? Yes, Isaac said without hesitation. When he's old enough to understand, we'll tell him the truth. Not to hurt him, but because he deserves to know where he comes from. We'll tell him his birth father made mistakes, but that we don't judge him for it. We'll tell him that I chose to be his father, and that choice matters more than biology. And we'll tell him that his grandfather tried to make amends at the end. That's a good lesson about redemption. Grace leaned against her husband, feeling the weight of the past finally lift from her shoulders. I love you, Isaac Edwards. You're the best man I've ever known. I'm just a man who recognized something precious when he found it, Isaac said, wrapping his arms around her and the baby growing inside her. And I'm never letting go. Winter passed peacefully. Grace's pregnancy progressed, and she grew large and uncomfortable as February turned to March. Thomas was walking and talking now, a bright, happy child who brought joy to everyone around him. He had Isaac's blue eyes and Grace's dark hair, and though Grace knew those features came from different sources, everyone said he looked just like his papa. On a warm afternoon in early April, Grace's contractions started. This labor was longer than her first and more difficult. Anne and the midwife coached her through it while Isaac held her hand and murmured encouragement. Finally, after nearly 12 hours, their daughter was born. A girl, the midwife announced, placing the screaming infant on Grace's chest. Healthy and strong. Grace looked down at her daughter, this child created from love rather than obligation, and felt overwhelming joy. She had her father's features already, his strong nose, his determined chin. There would be no mistaking whose daughter she was. She's perfect, Isaac said, tears streaming down his face. Absolutely perfect. What should we name her? I was thinking about your grandmother, Grace said. Anne told me her name was Rose. Would you like to name our daughter after her, Rose Edwards? Isaac tested the name. I love it. Rose Edwards, welcome to the world. Thomas was brought in to meet his baby sister, and though he was only 18 months old, he seemed fascinated by the tiny person. He gently patted her head and said, "Baby," with such pride that everyone laughed. The Edwards Ranch thrived over the next few years. Isaac's horse breeding program gained an excellent reputation, and buyers came from across the territory to purchase their stock. Grace managed the business side of things, keeping meticulous records and making smart breeding decisions. Together, they built something truly special. Thomas grew into a thoughtful, kind boy who adored his little sister and followed his father everywhere. Rose was spirited and fearless, always getting into mischief and keeping everyone on their toes. When she was 2, Grace discovered she was pregnant again, and their son Matthew was born in the spring of 1883. 2 years after that came another daughter, Lucy, As their family grew, so did their love. Isaac never wavered in his devotion to Grace or his children. He treated Thomas exactly the same as the others, never making any distinction between the son who shared his blood and the son who shared only his name. Thomas called him Papa and never questioned that he was deeply loved and wanted. On Thomas's 8th birthday, Isaac and Grace sat him down for an important conversation. Rose was playing in the yard with Matthew, and Lucy was napping, giving them privacy. "Thomas, we need to talk to you about something important," Grace began, her heart racing with nervousness. "Am I in trouble?" Thomas asked, his blue eyes wide. "No, sweetheart, nothing like that." Grace took his hand. "We need to tell you a story about where you came from." Over the next hour, they explained everything in age-appropriate terms. They told him about his birth father, about how he had died before Thomas was born. They told him about how Isaac had married Grace and chosen to be Thomas's father. They showed him Charles Whitmore's letter and explained about the trust fund that awaited him. Thomas listened quietly, processing it all. When they finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "So Papa isn't my real father?" he finally asked, his voice small. "I am absolutely your real father," Isaac said firmly, kneeling in front of Thomas. "Biology doesn't make a father, son. Love does. Showing up does. Teaching you to ride, helping you with your chores, reading you stories at night, that's what makes me your father. I chose you, Thomas. Before you were even born, I chose you. And I would choose you again every single day for the rest of my life. But I have another father's blood. You have another man's blood, yes, and that's okay. That's part of who you are, and we'll never hide it from you. But that man didn't get the chance to know you. I did. And I consider that the greatest blessing of my life." Thomas thought about this, his young face serious. Then he looked at Grace. "Mama, are you sad that my birth father died?" "I'm sad for what could have been," Grace said honestly. "But Thomas, if he had lived, if things had been different, you wouldn't be who you are. You wouldn't have grown up here on this ranch with your sisters and brother. You wouldn't have had Papa to teach you everything he knows. Everything happens for a reason, even painful things. Your birth father's death was tragic, but it led to our family. And I wouldn't change our family for anything." "Me neither," Thomas said. Then he turned to Isaac and threw his arms around his neck. "You're my papa. That man was just a name. You're my real father." Isaac hugged his son tight, tears streaming down his face. "You're my son, always and forever." From then on, the subject was settled. Thomas knew his history, but it didn't change who he was or how he saw his family. He occasionally asked questions about his birth father or grandfather, which Grace and Isaac answered honestly. But Isaac was Papa, and that never changed. The years passed in a blur of happy chaos. The ranch prospered. The children grew. Isaac's parents aged gracefully, eventually passing down the running of the ranch entirely to Isaac while they enjoyed their grandchildren. Elizabeth and Catherine married and started families of their own. Jake took over a section of the ranch to run his own operation. Grace and Isaac grew older together, their love deepening with each passing year. They faced challenges: droughts, sick livestock, economic downturns, childhood illnesses. But they faced everything together, their partnership unshakable. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Isaac took Grace on a picnic to Whitewater Creek, the place where she had finally told him her secret and he had proposed. They sat on a blanket in the same spot, older and grayer but still deeply in love. "Do you remember what I said to you all those years ago?" Isaac asked, taking her hand. "You said a lot of things," Grace teased. "You'll have to be more specific." "I said I was falling in love with you. With all of you, including the baby you carried. I told you I wanted to marry you and raise that child as mine. I remember, I thought you were crazy. Maybe I was. But Grace, it was the best decision I ever made. Marrying you, choosing Thomas, building this life together, I have no regrets. Not one. Neither do I, Grace said softly. You saved me, Isaac. You gave me everything I thought I'd lost: respectability, a home, a family, love. You saw past my mistakes and my shame and chose to love me anyway. I married you, not your past, Isaac said, echoing words he had spoken so many times over the years. Your past made you who you are, but it doesn't define you. Who you are, the woman you've become, the mother you've been, the partner you've been to me, that's what matters. That's what I fell in love with. They kissed, a sweet kiss full of 2 decades of love and partnership and commitment. Around them, the New Mexico mountains stood eternal. The creek burbled its timeless song, and somewhere back at the ranch, their children were going about their lives, secure in the knowledge that they were loved and wanted. Thomas was 18 now, a fine young man who had inherited Isaac's way with horses and Grace's head for business. He was courting a nice girl from a neighboring ranch. Rose at 16 was as spirited as ever, talking about becoming a teacher. Matthew at 13 was already a skilled rider and roper. Lucy at 11 was the family peacemaker, sweet and gentle. We did good, Grace said, looking at her husband with love. We built something beautiful. We did, Isaac agreed. And it all started with a scared young woman walking into a store covered in blood, and a cowboy who took one look at her and saw his future. Even though I was pregnant and broken and running from my past, especially then, Isaac said, because that's when you needed someone most. And I'm so grateful I got to be that someone. They stayed at the creek until sunset, talking about their children and their plans and their memories. Then they rode back to the ranch together, side by side, partners in all things. Years later, when Grace and Isaac were in their 60s and their children had children of their own, Thomas came to visit with his wife and 3 kids. After dinner, as they all sat on the porch watching the grandchildren play, Thomas pulled Isaac aside. "Pa, I need to tell you something." "What's that, son? My wife is expecting again, our 4th. And if it's a boy, we want to name him Isaac after you." Isaac felt tears prick his eyes. "Thomas, you don't have to do that. I want to. You gave me your name, your home, your love. You chose me when you didn't have to. That shaped everything about who I am. I want my son to carry your name forward. I want him to know about the man who showed me what it means to be a father." Isaac pulled his son into a tight embrace. "I'm honored. Thank you. Thank you," Thomas said, "for everything. For loving Ma when she needed it most. For being my father even though you didn't have to be. For building this family and this life. I couldn't have asked for a better father." They stood there for a moment, father and son, bound not by blood but by something stronger, choice and love and commitment. Then they rejoined the family, and the evening continued with laughter and stories, and the easy warmth of people who knew they were loved. Grace watched from her rocking chair, her hand in Isaac's, and felt nothing but contentment. Her past had been painful, full of loss and shame and fear. But it had led her here to this porch, this family, this man beside her who had seen her at her worst and chosen to love her anyway. "What are you thinking about?" Isaac asked softly. "How lucky I am," Grace said. "How blessed, how grateful. We both are," Isaac said, raising her hand to his lips and kissing it gently. "We both are." The sun set over the Mogollon Mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink and purple. On the Edwards Ranch, 3 generations of family gathered together, connected by bonds of love that transcended biology. Children played in the yard. Adults talked and laughed. And at the center of it all sat Grace and Isaac, the foundation upon which everything else was built. Their love story had begun with secrets and shame, with a pregnant woman trying to hide her belly and a cowboy who said, "I married you, not your past." It had grown into something beautiful and lasting, proving that second chances were real, that love could overcome anything, and that family was what you made it. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Grace leaned her head on Isaac's shoulder and closed her eyes, listening to the sounds of her family around her. This was happiness. This was home. This was the life she had never dared to dream she could have, gifted to her by a man with a generous heart and an unshakable commitment to the people he loved. And she knew, with absolute certainty, that she would spend the rest of her days grateful for the moment she had walked into that store in Pino's Altos, bloodstained and broken, and found salvation in the form of a cowboy who saw past her circumstances to the woman beneath. Isaac had kept his promise. He had married her, not her past. He had loved her, protected her, and built a life with her that was everything she had never known she wanted. And in return, she had given him her whole heart, her loyalty, and her love for all the days of her life. It was, by any measure, a love story for the ages, not because it was easy or perfect, but because it was real, built on honesty, trust, and the kind of commitment that weathers every storm, the kind of love that changes lives and creates legacies that last for generations. As night fell completely and the family began to drift inside, Isaac helped Grace to her feet. They stood together on the porch for one last moment, looking out over the land they had worked together, the home they had built together, the family they had created together. "I love you, Grace Edwards," Isaac said, just as he had said countless times over the past 40-plus years. "I love you, Isaac Edwards," Grace replied, meaning it just as deeply as the first time she had said those words. And hand in hand, they walked into their home, together as they had always been, together as they would always be, united by a love that had begun in darkness and bloomed into something luminous and lasting and true. The end.